Good evening, everyone. So, on behalf of the Violations Documentation Center and the Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression, I'll speak a little bit about the history of the VDC in particular, and I'll speak a little bit about how documentation works, the role it's playing right now, and the issue of detention in Syria, and the issue of enforced disappearance. And lastly, I'll provide recommendations from the organization that I work for. So, the Violations Documentation Center was founded in 2011 in response to the violent crackdown on protesters and the need to document the immense violations that were taking place and still are. By 2012, the number of arbitrary killings and other human rights violations, including imprisonment without trial and torture, had grown alarmingly fast, and the situation in Syria had escalated into an armed conflict as per the ICRC's legal qualification, with the applicability of the Geneva Conventions and customary international human rights law. These developments, alongside the government's crackdown on those perceived to be reporting on the situation, such as journalists, bloggers, social media activists, etc., prompted the VDC to expand its role and include the coverage of new systematic violations. The VDC's founder, Razan Zaitouni, a longtime human rights lawyer and activist, believed in meticulously documenting violations, regardless of the actor and their political alliances. For this reason, when she moved to Duma and continued her work, she presented a threat to Jaish al-Islam, the strongest military faction on the ground at the time. On December 9, 2013, a group of armed men stormed into the office of the VDC and abducted Razan Zaitouni alongside colleagues Samir al-Khalil, Wa'il Hamada, and Nazim Hamadi. No concrete news of their whereabouts has been heard from since. Over the years, evidence gathering at the VDC and other Syrian human rights organizations became much more sophisticated, with organizations developing in-depth databases to ensure that each piece of information is verified, classified, protected, and linked to existing evidence. New information is compared and corroborated against a large body of interrelated information. The VDC documents as much information as possible on each violation, including its perpetrators, the place of occurrence, date of occurrence, type of violation, and other statistical attributes related to the victims and the violations. And to explain a little bit about the stages of data documentation, the VDC carries out a multiple-stage process of documentation in order to achieve the highest level of accuracy. At the first stage, information is gathered and documented by the data collectors, a group of human rights and field activists, as well as reporters assigned by the center in different regions. In addition, data is collected from other reliable sources, such as field hospitals, cemeteries, families of casualties, and certain media centers. Once data credibility is established and documented in special forms, the data is then sent to the database administrative team, who in turn compare the information and establish verification. At the second stage, videos, images, and any other information related to the victims are gathered in the days following the incident. This data is then presented to the data inspectors, a team that consists of specialists in different Syrian provinces. This process ensures data accuracy, correctness, and completeness before it is entered into the database. And lastly, the third stage, follow-ups and updates take place on a daily and monthly basis for data to be entered into the database. Information is sent back to the field activists to ensure that it is free from errors. Additionally, new information and materials such as photos and videos are entered. This task is carried out by data collectors and data inspectors. Both work on collating complete lists of information on casualties in different cities and villages to be compared with information documented by the center. The executive team regularly inspects the database to minimize errors that may have taken place during the process. Nearly 8 years after the uprising began, there are now over 400 individuals and local groups supplying various Syrian documentation centers with information. The documentation centers, in turn, collaborate with international NGOs and organizations working in matters related to justice and accountability in Syria. The cooperation of international lawyers was key to professionalizing evidence gathering. Since March 2011, we have so far documented a total of 190,366 battle-related deaths in Syria, 64% of which were civilians. The Syrian government was responsible for 146,522, or nearly 80% of the total casualties. We estimate that around 75,000 people have been forcibly disappeared since the beginning of the uprising. Sadly, the increase in sophistication has not been matched by better options for accountability. So far, evidence from the VDC has been used to help consolidate the limited number of universal jurisdiction cases. Human rights centers have also helped alert national authorities when they have received such evidence. But when it comes to universal jurisdiction cases, the odds are slim and don't satisfy victims who want to see perpetrators punished, of course. And certainly, a handful of cases in European countries is not at all the justice that we're looking for. But so far, it's the only window of action there is for now. Nearly all major documentation centers are now working to shape the UN's International Impartial and Independent Mechanism, what's also known as the IIIM, established at the 2016 Geneva talks. Though the IIIM and the Coalition for, I misplaced something here. The mechanism aims to unify a wide array of information and various evidence-gathering groups in order to create methodologically consistent case files. It will also look for the most appropriate options for using them, which at the moment are limited to national courts in foreign countries. The Syrian government has recently, as we've just seen, updated civil registries in several parts of the country, including the Damascus countryside, Hama, Aleppo, and Suwaida provinces, to show individuals known to have been previously detained and disappeared by the Syrian government as dead. In some cases, families were provided with death certificates reflecting dates of deaths that went back years, and claiming the reasons for the death as a heart attack, as Amina has just demonstrated in her narrative. It is estimated that hundreds of families have discovered the fate of their missing relatives in this manner. The Syrian government has not responded to the relatives' request to obtain the remains of their loved ones and information on the circumstances of the death and enforced disappearance. Many families were too scared to request the additional information. As things stand, there is no way to verify the deaths without the government returning the remains of the families and without the launch of an independent investigation into the cause of death. Moreover, the government continues to detain tens of thousands in official and unofficial detention facilities. It has also denied international monitors access to nearly all these facilities, and there are no due process or fair trial guarantees for these detainees. The Syrian government has demonstrated a lack of commitment to the international agreements and treaties it ratified, in particular the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights. In addition, the Syrian regime has violated its own constitution, as hundreds of thousands of detainees have been detained for many years with no arrest warrants or any charges. The Syrian regime has also denied those detainees the right to an attorney and barred their families from visiting them. Enforced disappearance was the strategy the Syrian regime used to target anyone connected to the uprising. Analyzing data shows that the phenomenon was prevalent in the areas that were distinctly known for joining the uprising, as in the case of Daraya, which suggests that this was based on a consistent and deliberate policy, including the revealing of forcibly disappeared persons' fate, which was also done in a deliberate manner. The implications of this, in a way, serve the criminal act itself, judging from the arrests that targeted figures who supported the popular uprising, which was followed by forcibly disappearing them, and then issuing the death certificate that don't contain any information about the place and the cause of their deaths. We note that enforced disappearance is prohibited according to the customary international humanitarian law and the international criminal law. And we call on the Security Council to hold an emergency meeting to discuss this critical matter that threatens the fates of nearly 75,000 individuals and terrorizes the whole Syrian society. As a human rights organization, we urge the Security Council to act to stop torture and deaths due to torture inside Syrian government detention centers and evacuate the remaining, whoever of which are left in the detention centers as quickly as possible. We stress that the Human Rights Council follow up on the issue of the detainees and forcibly disappeared in Syria and shed light on it in periodic annual meetings and dedicate a special session to address it. Lastly, as a human rights organization, we demand that the Syrian regime ends its enforced disappearance, torture, and death due to torture, as well as an end to the tampering and exploiting of civil records. Thank you.